Hey, everybody that's already logged in. Thank you for joining us. We're going to give everyone just another couple minutes to trickle in. We have a big group expected, so we're going to just mute here and turn off the camera for just a couple minutes, and we'll get started in maybe 2 or 3 minutes. All right. Welcome, everybody. My name is Brian Cancian. I'm the Business Development Manager here with Foundation Software. I'd like to welcome you back to another uh, educational webinar series. Today, we are very happy to have with us Eldar Satakov with Field Materials to talk about tariffs and cost trends in commercial construction. With everything that's going on in the world today, all of the uncertainty in pricing and fluctuation, I found this to be a very, very timely topic, and we're very happy to have them here with us today. Eldar?
Thank you, Brian, for the introduction. Welcome to this webinar. Yes, tariffs is a hot topic, and today what we're going to discuss is some of the pricing trends we're seeing across our data, anonymized data, in construction in terms of material pricing and equipment pricing, and we're going to talk about strategies you can apply to mitigate this. Along with a few other things. So again, welcome everyone. And the first thing I want to do is just maybe introduce myself and give a little background on who I am. So my name is Eldar. I'm one of the founders of Field Materials, also CEO of Field Materials. I come from a family of construction folks. My father ran a general contracting business doing civil and commercial work, and my mom has been a CFO of construction companies her whole life. I myself pursued a different career. I actually ended up doing a computer science degree and then a PhD in computer science and AI at Stanford. My first company actually was AI for retail, then ended up selling to PayPal. And now I partnered with a good friend of mine, Victor, who comes from this field, to work on Field Materials about 3.5 years ago. And I'll maybe mention about what Field Materials does later. But in a general theme, we're doing AI software for construction procurement, for procurement of materials and equipment. And I'm very excited to be in this field because of my roots and my family connection to this field. And I feel like home now doing building software for this industry. First of all, maybe a little background on Field Materials, not to, just for context for all of you. We're a leading AI startup. We've raised about 19 million in venture capital funding. We now have customers across 28 states, across 9 construction trades. the data is now, the fresher data is actually over 5,000 projects utilizing fill materials, over 10,000 vendors, and based on just last quarter alone, we're processing about $500 million in material and equipment purchases across our customer base. So the data that you're going to see here is based on an anonymized sample of what we're seeing in our platform. And again, the volume is pretty substantial, $500 million, and we're very excited to share this trends with you. And maybe lastly, I will add that the analysis will be focusing on two specific trades, mechanical and electrical. And the reason why we did this is because we didn't want to overwhelm you with a lot of different data and a lot of different trades, and wanted to focus on just two representative trades, but a lot of the data that you're going to see will apply to the general construction industry as a whole. All right, so here's our plan for today. We're going to start by talking about what's happening to material prices in 2025. So first of all, what are the economic factors that are impacting material prices? Then we're going to look at mechanical trade, specifically the changes that we're seeing in material prices this year so far. Then we're going to do the same thing with electrical trade, look at the specific changes that we're seeing in material prices. Then after that, we're going to talk about what levers do you have over material costs. And we'll present to you four recommended strategies. One is setting up buyouts for each job. I'll talk about what this means and how it's set up. We'll talk about cutting down on rogue spending, because buyouts will do no good if you actually cannot control your rogue spending in the field and capturing those orders in the field. Then we're going to talk about stocking up on inventory, what some of the contractors are doing. And lastly, we're going to talk about just analysis that you could do on where you spend the money, and then using the data and analysis to negotiate better rates with your suppliers, better rates with your vendors. After that, we're going to talk about how some of the things that we're going to talk, what we discussed previously here in the second section, requires some changes in the process. And so that's a lot of times, contractors might push back. So I'm going to explain how AI can actually empower these levers without any changes to your process. So specifically, how AI can read a lot of the information, like pricing information, off of the documents themselves, whether it's invoices or quote documents or packing slips. And then I'm going to explain how this new way of doing things is different from traditional OCR, for example, what you might be familiar with. And finally, I'll conclude by benchmarking existing procurement process, because when we think about material costs, it's not just about the prices you pay, but the general overhead that comes with procurement and purchasing materials. So we'll do some benchmarking in terms of how much, what is that overhead cost for buying materials.
And Eldar, just a quick housekeeping item for everyone here in attendance. We are going to have a quick polling question as we get toward the end. We're going to have time for Q&A once the presentation is through. For those of you that have attended before, you're probably familiar, but for those that haven't, if you look at your toolbar across the top, there is a questions box there, one of those icons. You can just type your question right into the console there, and we'll be fielding those and going through those as we have time at the end of the session.
Yep. Are we doing a poll as well, Brian?
Yes, I do believe.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, so let's start off by talking about economic factors that impact material prices. So obviously tariffs is a big topic these days, and for all of us. And just 2-3 weeks ago, like the reason why this big cargo ship is on the slide is because just 2-3 weeks ago, we had the story about this big cargo ship that was in, I think, LA or one of the ports of California, and they had to turn it around because of the tariffs, and they literally just dumped the cargo into the sea, because they didn't want to take it back. So anyway, so I want to start from that little story, but why do you care? Why, as a contractor, do you care? Well, even if you say I buy from U.S. distributors, you should care because eventually U.S. distributors' inventory will run out, and when it runs out, this inventory will have to be restocked from manufacturers, And some of these manufacturers may be international ones, which may be subject to tariffs. Whether it's Canada, whether it's China, or any other country, you need to pay attention to that. Even if it's a U.S. manufacturer, so let's take, I don't know, you might be a mechanical contractor buying from Trane HVAC equipment. It's a U.S. manufacturer, but they may source components and raw materials from abroad. And those materials could be subject to tariffs. So let's say you buy an HVAC equipment, but that comes with a lot of electronics and chips that are produced elsewhere that might be subject to tariffs. So that's why you should care. That may impact the prices. And finally, even if you buy from U.S. distributors and those distributors buy from U.S. manufacturers and they source materials domestically, so like perfect scenario, you may still be impacted by supply chain issues and just overall rising costs that are happening in supply chain. Why is this happening? Because as the supply chain network gets rerouted, where we may be sourcing now something that used to come from China from another place, that impacts your truck routes, that impacts your overall costs and supply chain shock essentially. It's the same thing that happened during COVID to some extent, and you need to just plan for this and amortize potential cost increases here. So let's start from mechanical trade. So let me start off by explaining how we did our analysis. So we took November as a baseline because tariffs were not really on the horizon back then, at least not quite, not clearly. And we said, okay, this is our baseline, and let's look at everything that mechanical, and we did it over a big sample of mechanical contractors, and each mechanical contractor places hundreds of orders per month. So you're looking at the data that across thousands, if not tens of thousands of different orders that are placed every single month. And what we're looking at is, okay, November is our baseline. We need to be careful about how we weigh each material in this basket, because if you pay attention to things like consumer price index, you want to weigh those items that get purchased more frequently, the volume of which is higher, with a higher weight. And so that's what we've done. We said anything that's purchased more frequently, let's weigh it proportionately to the total volume that it contributes to the total spending. And let's look at everything that gets purchased every month, November, December, January, and so on and so forth, and then weigh each purchase proportionally to its contribution to the total volume, to the total basket of products. And so as you can see from this slide, hopefully that methodology is clear to you. You can see that in November, December, we were staying pretty flat. Even January, we were staying pretty flat. As you go into February, there is a 1% jump increase, but there is a bigger jump in March. So we go into 5% increase in March and almost 8% in April. So we're clearly seeing a pretty clear upward trend in prices that we haven't seen in the previous months, at least not in the winter months. And then to validate our analysis, we've also sampled the top 10 products that get purchased, and you can see that a lot of it is actually plumbing products. So this is not the exact top 5, but it's a sample of the top 10 products, along with some tools and things like that would be common for mechanical trade. So analysis seems valid, and like I said, we're seeing a clear upward trend, and this data is across thousands of different orders that we've looked at. Now let's look at electrical trade. Electrical trade, this time around, we decided not to take November as the baseline because we didn't see much difference between November and December, but we said let's take January as our baseline and do the same exact methodology. So we say, let's look at all the products that get purchased, let's weigh them in relation to the overall basket of products, so like overall volume of purchases that are happening, and say, okay, the product's contribution to the price index is proportional to its volume of purchases. And then you can see January, February are flat, but as you go into March and you go into April, we're seeing a pretty big jump. So 3% in March and then 5% in April. So as you can see, both from these two trades, we're seeing a pretty clear upward trend. Now, to validate our analysis, we did the same thing and looked at what are the top 10 products that are getting, some of the top 10 products that get purchased in electrical trade. You can see, as expected, a lot of conduits from different materials and some cable connectors, and pretty common stuff that an electrical contractor would purchase. So the conclusion from this is that, and we looked at a few other trades, that there are some that are flat, but overall there is an upward trend that we're seeing in more than half of the trades that we've looked at, and MEP specifically, that's what we're seeing. So now let's talk about what levers do you have over material costs. So if the material costs are rising, and we don't know how long tariffs will be, maybe it's for a few years, maybe it's for a few months, but what levers do you have to mitigate the risk of rising material costs? And we'll talk about four main strategies that we'd like to cover based on what we see, what our customers are doing. Now, one is setting up buyouts for each job. This is a practice that some contractors started doing during COVID. It's more common in framing trade, I would say, historically, but it's been less common in some other trades. But the idea here is that when you win a job, when you bid out a job, you have an estimated quantities of each material that you're going to need. You can go to your supplier and say, hey, I'm going to commit to purchase the entire volume of that material from you if you can lock in the price for me, and ideally a favorable price for me. So that's the idea of a buyout, and I'll talk a little bit about it in the next slide. Second thing you do is you cut down rogue spending, because even if you set up a buyout, if majority of your purchases are rogue, meaning that they're not planned, they're not documented, they're not based on a specific quote, and it's just like lots and lots of incidental purchases, then it's going to be very hard for you to control your costs because those will be retail prices. And so, what can you do to control that and capture that type of rogue spending? That's the next item we're going to talk about. Then the third item what we're going to talk about is inventory. So we've seen that, again, during COVID, a lot of contractors stocked up on inventory at the warehouse for the most common materials. We'll talk about limitations of that when this may not be applicable to you, but this is also a strategy. And finally, the fourth one, which is very important, not a lot of contractors realize it, but you can actually look at the entire volume of everything you buy throughout the year, not just a standalone job, but everything. Like, let's say you do 200 jobs per year. Look at the entire volume of orders and aggregate and understand, analyze where you spending money on each materials, how much you spending, and then go back to your suppliers and try to negotiate better rates, kind of volume pricing with your suppliers. Very important strategy, especially as you try to scale up your operations. Let's now dive into what's a buyout, right? A buyout, some customers use this term, some contractors don't use it, but I think it's fairly common. In our definition, a buyout is a pricing commitment with an approximate volume. So I know that some people also use the terms like hold for release orders or not ready for release orders. Those are a little bit different in my mind because those represent a hard commitment. Typically, a buyout, at least the way a buyout's defined in framing and drywall industry is it's an approximate volume. You're saying, I'm going to buy this much, copper wire. I might be off by 5% or 10%, but roughly I'm going to buy this much in quantity, and give me your best price, and I'm going to commit to buy all of it from you. I'm not going to shop around for any other from any other supplier. And when you commit to this is an approximate volume. You're not saying that go and stock the entire quantity to the supplier. You're saying that this is an approximate volume. And so what you need, however, is you need a system to track how much you've ordered against that buyout and how much is remaining. Because, like I said, if it's not a hard commitment down to an individual unit, then you need to track where you are. And again, the alternative to that is to set up what's called not ready for release or hold for release order, where you say, okay, this is an exact quantity I need, but I will tell you when you need to ship it. That's also kind of a sibling of a buyout, I would say, but it's a much harder commitment, because in the case of hold for release and not ready for release, in my mind, you're telling the supplier, go and stock that item, have it ready, because I'm going to buy all of it. versus a buyout where you might be off by 5 to 10%, like I mentioned. All right, so now that's a way for you to mitigate prices on a given job, to de-risk your given job. Now, how can you, but what's going to happen, and we talk to a lot of contractors every day, is that how can you avoid rogue spending? Because if your field guys will go, or service technicians will go and buy things as they come up, there will be rogue spending, and the key is to cut down on it, or reduce it. You're not going to remove rogue spending; it's going to happen, but you need to cut down on it. And the way to cut down on it is to uh, create a digital trail of every field purchase that's happening. And the way to do it in best practice that we developed with our customers is to reserve a PO for any purchase that you're going to be making. Reserve a PO so that you have a record of it. And then this is how, for example, it looks in our system, but it could look in your process differently, where you say, okay, I'm going to buy this for this job. I'm going to get a PO number. I'm going to cost code it as plumbing. So I'm going to buy some plumbing materials and then get a PO number, give it to the supplier, or either on the phone or something. So it takes like a minute, maybe 30 seconds for a field technician to do that. And then whenever they actually go to the counter, whenever they go to the supply house, whether it's Ferguson or whoever, they take a picture of that packing slip. So they take a picture of it. So now you have a record of what they purchased. So you know exactly what, you have a PO number. So when the invoice comes in, you can tie it back, and you have a packing slip for it, or a bill of lading, whatever you want to call it. And then obviously, then somebody has to actually read that packing slip. But here's where AI can actually itemize that order for you, and you'll have a full record of what they bought with the PO number. So when the invoice comes in, you have full accountability, and you can even enforce buyout pricing at that point in time, because you could say, okay, I see the materials, they match my existing buyout, so apply the buyout pricing to it. So things like that are all possible, but you need to stay organized and really cut down on rogue spending and control it. Now, third lever is inventory. Very important lever. It may not apply to every trade, but again, we've seen it during COVID times. You look at most frequently used materials across all of your jobs, because you do a lot of jobs that will have a lot of common materials, and you stock up on them. You store them at your warehouse. This way you avoid the risk of escalating prices by pre-purchasing and buying in bulk. And in this case, you're actually putting in your own warehouse, and paying upfront for it. Again, the caveats here is obviously it requires cash investment. Not everyone may have the cash, because you might be waiting on some milestone payments. Also, it works in trades where there are fewer SKUs. Like we've seen this work very well in insulation, fireproof, and fire stopping, where the number of SKUs you buy is relatively short. It gets more complex. Let's say you get into framing or something like that. You have a lot of different SKUs, different gauges, and it's not easy. Also doesn't work where materials are bulky. So think about precast pipes, or, again, coming back to framing, it's not easy to stock up on these types of materials because they're very, very bulky. So it doesn't work in every trade, but you could definitely apply it in, for example, MEP trade to some extent, and certainly in insulation, fireproofing, fire stop, and those types of trades. And then finally, which is probably the least obvious in my opinion, but this strategy is very effective, is if you are very organized and you are capable to itemize every single purchase order that you have, every single purchase you have, and you track the quantities of things that you buy, you can actually do the report at the end of the year, analyze how much of each material you purchased and what is the total dollar spent for each material with each supplier, and then go back to your suppliers and come with a specific negotiation strategy, like give me a 10% discount on all of the materials off of your retail price, off of the street price, as long as I buy, relatively the same volume, or maybe even 10 or 20% more. Very effective strategy. But again, the reason why a lot of contractors may still struggle with it is because it's hard, right? Because a lot of times you create a lump sum PO and you're like, I don't know exactly which items I bought. And that's why it's not always easy to implement in practice, but it's a very powerful strategy, and that could really separate you from competition and de-risk a lot of your jobs. So, and that brings me to the next point. We know that these strategies are great, but you have to have the right tools for the strategies, because for example, if you're not itemizing your POs and you're just doing lump sum POs, what I described to you with volume pricing is not going to work for you. You're not going to have the data. And that's where I'm going to show you how some of the latest advances in AI can provide support for a lot of the strategies, whether it's a buyout, whether it's itemizing, reserved purchase order, or, tracking all the material pricing throughout the year, can provide support for this without changing your existing process. So before I do that, let me explain how. So like you'd say, okay, AI, how is AI relevant even to this discussion? The reason why it's relevant is because a lot of the pricing information is actually locked into the documents themselves. So whether you use a quote document from a supplier, or you use a delivery slip, or use an invoice, or you use a basic receipt from Home Depot, all that information is actually locked in the document itself. So you can itemize all these purchase orders if you can read these documents reliably, and if you can extract the prices off of the documents themselves. And the idea here is that you can basically improve your margins by cutting down all this rogue spending, by being able to itemize every single field order that's happening, every single will call order that's happening in the field. You can reduce the overhead costs by cutting a lot of the PO and invoice processing time, because you might say, oh, to create itemized POs, I have to do a lot of manual data entry. Well, AI can actually do this work for you, so it can actually cut down that cost. And finally, it can unlock your ability to do volume pricing, because now you can capture all this data across all the different quotes and invoices that you process throughout the year. So let's take an example. And what I want to say here is that I try to use examples from different trades. So like here, I took an example of a lumber quote. So before, we looked a lot at mechanical, electrical trades, but I decided to take a lumber quote here. And it has 109 items, 7 pages long. And what you have here is, to itemize this type of quote, it would take a lot of work. It would take a lot of data entry. And that's why, you have purchasing teams in the office doing this. But AI can actually itemize this for you within seconds. So you can actually have AI read that quote line item by line item, and, break it down into the exact quantities, the unit prices, the individual line items. And now you have itemized information with all the pricing that you're paying right there, with no additional effort from your side or from your team. The same idea applies to packing slips, or bill of lading, or hauling tickets, or trucking tickets. The information is there. So like, let's say, coming back to this example of reserving a PO, and let's say your foreman goes and buys something as a will call order, you can actually snap a picture of that delivery slip, and then the AI can actually read the line items that the foreman actually bought from the supplier, with all the quantities, and quickly itemize that into a purchase order. Again, with no additional effort. They just need to take a picture, right? The same idea, even if you have an existing PO, you can have AI read that packing slip and then identify the correct line items in that PO, and check the actual quantities, track the received quantities in that PO. So again, this doesn't come as additional work for your existing process. And finally, invoices. I'm sure that you get a ton of invoices across all the different purchases you make. And the idea here is that a lot of times you need to read that invoice, you need to download that invoice, you need to cost code that invoice, you need to match it against the purchase order. Well, the AI can do a lot of all these things. Basically, it will download the invoice, read the invoice, identify the correct purchase order, track how much, compare it to the received quantities, assuming that you use the AI to read the packing slips in the field, And now you can automate the three validation. You can even automate price verification, where you say, okay, did it match what I intended to buy, whether it comes from a buyout or from a quote that you received from the supplier. So, and even if you didn't have a PO, you can actually use AI to itemize that invoice for you, and then you capture all the prices and all the quantities right there. So that then at the end of the year, you know how much you've spent on each material. So all of that becomes possible by using large language models to read this documents. Which naturally brings me to the next point in here, which is, and this sort of explains some of the points that I said: automatically finding the PO items, validating invoice received quantities, and validating the prices. Which brings me to the next point. How is this different from OCR? Because a lot of people, you probably have used some OCR technology for invoices before, and OCR stands for optical character recognition. And how is it that I'm describing different from traditional OCR? And the reason why it's different is because OCR is designed to read characters. So it's designed to identify actual blobs of text and characters on the document. But you actually have to build templates for each document. So you have to go for each invoice, and you could say, and you're going to have to say, for Ferguson, the invoice number is in that corner, the subtotal is here, the date of the invoice is there, and as long as it's in the same locations, the OCR is going to read that information and is going to extract it from that document. If that format changes, tomorrow or next month, you're going to have to rebuild that template, and you're going to have to do it for every single vendor that you have. And more importantly, to OCR, there is no meaning to It's like is it's just characters. It doesn't understand that this, two sequences, two lines actually represent the same material. So you have to continue reading that material name into the next line. To it, it's just characters. Versus large language models, they operate differently. OCR is just one step in that process, because you take a textual representation of that document, whether it's a quote document or an invoice, and then you combine that with a layout. It's a multimodal LLM to understand, okay, I see a table. That table has a header. The column says units. Okay, now I understand. I'm going to be expecting units. And it's trained on thousands of quote documents to generalize patterns, to generalize the fact that an invoice number typically shows up here and it's next to the field that says invoice #, or PO number could be called customer PO number, or whatever that is. And it's designed to handle sequences of data. So it will understand things like, okay, this row continues into the next row, so it's the same material. And it interprets the text in relation to other elements. So it could say, okay, where is that piece of text showing up? Is that in this column? Does it continue into the next page? Uses the information from the previous page to interpret this. So it really reads the document as if a human brain would be looking at this with human eyes. And, that's the power of AI. And, the beautiful thing is that it's a layer or intelligence that you can build on top of your existing powerful, ERP-like foundation, where a lot of times you would say, how can I bring this data? How can I onboard quickly? Well, all the data is imported very easily. Projects, vendors, cost codes, cost types, general ledger accounts, equipment, they all can be brought from foundation, and then the purchase orders can be read and written back between field materials and foundation, as well as invoices exported via the FSI. So there is no work in terms of like, onboarding or put in data, duplicate data entry. This is kind of flows nicely between the two. And just to summarize, and I'll get to the kind of conclusion and some of the benchmarking process that we've done on procurement process. Field materials what is it to the end user? It's a mobile app in the hands of a field worker, like a service technician or foreman, that allows them to scan a packing slip, scan a receipt, request material, scan a field requisition form. And it's a desktop component which is used by project managers, purchasing staff, as well as accounts payable staff, that allows them to review orders, upload quotes, to create purchase orders out of them, verify receipts, verify invoices, do all the usual stuff. And then there's a component that automates all the communication with suppliers. So, every time you make a change to an order, let's say you add some quantities, you add an item to it, on top of an existing quote, it will send out an email to supplier notifying them about the change. But supplier participation is completely optional, so you could kind of keep it offline from suppliers even if you wanted to. All right, so that sort of I'm getting close to the end, so we'll open up the floor to questions. But before I do that, I wanted to leave you with something which is very important, which is we talked about material prices so far. We talked about how material prices are increasing in the face of tariffs, and we talked about how it is important to have certain levers to itemize, extract pricing off of the documents, and really be smart about how you lock in these prices and how AI can help you. But on top of the material prices themselves, there is a process that you take which is overhead costs to actually buy materials. And a lot of contractors don't realize that. There's a lot of overhead process to the procurement process, to the purchasing process itself. And that adds to your material costs. So let me explain what I mean by that. First of all, a lot of the POs and a lot of the orders start from the field, where your field crew will actually either call the office or type an email or send a text message or maybe fill out a field requisition form and send it to the office. That's probably 15 minutes for the person doing this work. And if you have two people on the phone, that's probably twice the amount of time. Then if you have a purchasing staff in the office, then you'll have a purchaser that will actually need to create that purchase order in Foundation. That's another 15 minutes of time because they have to actually put it and then send it to the supplier, make sure that they know which items need to be purchased. Then field staff, whether it's at the job site itself or at the warehouse, they receive the order, they look at the packing slip, they check off the items, they see if there are any issues. That's another 15 minutes. And if they need to send that slip to the office, that's another additional time. That's another 15 minutes. Then the purchasing, a lot of times has to follow up with the vendor. What's the lead time? When is it going to get shipped? Oh, we had a delivery issue. We need to return this. How are you going to issue credit? The invoice did not come at the right price. So blended across different orders, that's probably another 15 minutes amortized across different orders you have. And then obviously you get the invoice. AP team process the invoice. They need to cost code it, maybe kick it back to the project manager, download it, enter the details into Foundation, check against PO, against the pack, and so that's another 20 minutes. So all in all this time adds up because this is altogether now an hour and 20 minutes. An hour of 20 minutes at $50 per hour, that's $67 on order. And if you imagine your average order is $1,000, that's 6.7% that was added to your material costs that on top of the price that you pay. And that's technically another lever that you have. You need to understand where that money is coming from. And if you're doing 10,000 POs per year, that's $667,000 per year, just on incremental costs to buy materials, essentially. And so that's something I want to leave you with. So I want to quickly just summarize what we discussed here. We talked about tariffs, how they impact in prices. We talked about what's happening in MEP trade, and it applies to all other trades, how materials are rising. We talked about ways to mitigate this, strategies to mitigate this. And we talked about how AI can help you, do these levers. And then we concluded by sort of incremental overhead costs that go into that. With that, I'd like to stop here and take time for questions. If you need any specifics on how the data was calculated or how we did our analysis, feel free to email me or even call me. I even put my phone number here. So thank you very much, and we'll open up the floor for questions now.
And we have the poll here up on the screen. If you guys can just take a minute and quick answer. And again, we do have the Q&A open. So there should be a little icon toward the top of your screen with the question mark in it. That'll open up the questions panel. Feel free to type your question there and submit it, and we will go through whatever we can. Poll in progress. Only 24% voted. It looks like the turnout at my last local election.
That's true. Pretty tight. And don't be shy to ask questions. I think we'll probably do more, this type of analysis, going into the year as prices are changing. But um, it's definitely a lot of interesting insights what we're gaining from this.
You have a question here is how can I get the recording of this presentation? For all of you who are still here, links to the presentation are sent out once everything is wrapped up. You should receive an email, most likely tomorrow, with a link to the recording.
So I see a couple of questions coming in. So should I go ahead and read it, Brian?
Sure, yeah.
All right. So if I use fill materials, does this mean I no longer need to enter invoices into Foundation on the AP module? Yeah, we try to automate as much of it as possible. Basically, you will be able to enter it in, fill materials will scan, will read the invoice, will automatically match it to the purchase order, do the hard work, kind of verify the prices and all of that. And then you would export it to a file and then drag it into FSI. And then through FSI, all the data will be already entered for you. That's how it works. What is the implementation time of getting AI set up? Yeah, feel free to get us in touch with us if you're curious, but it's very quick. I would say typically 2 to 3 weeks. We have a specialist that works with you to kind of make sure that we can import all the jobs, all the cost types, everything else, and it's about a couple weeks.
I do have a question here. It says, I don't have a specific question, but I do appreciate your thoughts. I've been in the electrical industry for 30 years, and there's always a small ways you can help or find to help boost the company's bottom line. Oh, there is no question. Just a thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it. We try to, what I want to say to this and react to it is the fact that we have the privilege of working with many contractors, and same with Foundation, and that's why we see certain like patterns and we try to share those insights with you guys. In terms of pricing and cost, I suggest that you reach out to us, to get the specifics. I don't want to take the time during the webinar to talk about pricing. What is the AI software to identify if the amount of material bought is within a budget previously set up? Could it give some sort of a warning when we're about to reach 100% of the budget? Great question. So we have different levers for budget that we built. Basically, you have a budget that we can pull from Foundation, which is at the job level, broken down by cost code and cost type. So that's the budget, one lever that you have. In addition to that, obviously you have per order or per buyout budget. And technically we don't prevent you from going over a buyout because typically the supplier won't object if you end up buying more material, but we will show it to you in red that the buyout number, for example, exceeded. And then the budget, definitely we will warn it to you at the order stage, at the invoice stage, because depending on your Foundation settings, you might get an error when trying to export above the budget. Let's see. What is the pricing of the user accounts module per invoice? So we'll hold off on pricing questions just because I don't want to bore everyone with these details. Like I said, reach out to us and we can provide you a pricing estimate. Will you be at the Foundation Expo? Yes, we are planning to definitely attend and very excited to be there. We were there last year and definitely excited to attend this year as well.
And for those of you who haven't heard, we are having Converge 25, that is our user conference, out in fabulous Las Vegas, October 6th through the 9th at Mandalay Bay. Our final evening will be a beach party out on the beach around all the pools, and it's definitely going to be a good time. I certainly encourage you all to sign up as soon as you drop off of this call.
And I can just vouch for the Converge shows. I did not go, but my colleagues went last year, and they said one of the best organized shows. So good job, Foundation team.
Thank you. Anybody else? Any other questions? I'm not seeing anything coming in. Any final thoughts?
I think what I want to add maybe towards the end is that the I want to say that we're living in a very special moment, not just because of tariffs or anything like that. I mean, obviously that's top of mind for all of us, but we're going through a major technological transformation with the emergence of AI and LLM technology, I would say. And I'm very excited about some of the advances we're gonna have in terms of how we can do construction, how we can make it more, bring more accountability to it, and better controls and automation. So really excited about that.
Yeah, it really does change the way that the back office operates, and the field for that matter. I think a lot of the attendees here are used to what goes on in the back office, and less so in terms of what's out in the field. But being able to bring those two groups of people together and collaborate with this type of information is priceless. To have everybody on the same page.
I would say the three major developments really prepared us for this is the fact that the field now has the mobile devices in their hands. That's one big development. LLMs themselves really make, obviously enable this technology in the first place. And number three is the fact that ERPs like Foundation are now cloud connected. Are big. We would not be there if those three factors did not happen in the last 5 to 10 years, I would say, or maybe
Yep.
3 years, LLM specifically.
Right. All right. I don't see any new questions coming in on the question panel here. So I think that we would be safe to call it an afternoon. Yeah, so for all of you guys that are still hanging out here, we absolutely appreciate you attending this afternoon. You can see Eldar's information still on the screen. Please don't hesitate to reach out should you have any questions about field materials. Obviously, here we are with Foundation. We're always available for anything else you need, and happy to help any way we can. Eldar, thank you so much for joining us today. It was a great presentation, a lot of good material.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you everyone for joining. Hopefully you're happy that we're giving some time back as well. We finished early.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Have a great afternoon.